HOA fined me for hanging laundry outside, so I bought the HOA president's house and turned it into a laundromat. I never thought hanging laundry could change my life, but that's exactly what happened in Oak Ridge Estates, the suburban neighborhood in Northern Virginia where I'd lived quietly for 6 years. It all started last summer during a heat wave that sent electricity bills soaring. My ancient dryer was already on its last legs, making concerning noises with each load. When it finally gave up during the hottest week of July, I figured it was a sign. Instead of immediately replacing it, I decided to try something my grandmother had always done: air drying clothes outside. The next Saturday morning, I installed a simple retractable clothesline in my backyard, running from the side of my house to a tree near the back fence. There was something satisfying about hanging sheets and shirts in the morning sunshine, watching them billow in the breeze. Not only was I saving energy, but my clothes smelled amazing. That fresh outdoor scent no dryer sheet could ever replicate. 3 peaceful days passed before the knock came at my door. Margaret Wilson stood on my doorstep, clipboard in hand, pearl necklace perfectly aligned over her crisp blue blouse. As the Oak Ridge Estates HOA president for the past decade, Margaret took her position very seriously. "Good afternoon, Mr. Lawson," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm here about a violation notice." "Violation?" I asked, genuinely confused. "What violation?" She handed me an official-looking letter. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Homeowners Association bylaws clearly states, "No laundry, clothing, or other materials may be hung, displayed, or aired outside the home. You've been observed hanging laundry in your backyard. That's a $100 fine per occurrence." I stared at the paper, which documented 3 separate violations, with timestamps and even photos. "You've been photographing my backyard?" "We document all violations," Margaret replied briskly. "The fine totals $300. Payment is due within 14 days. "This is ridiculous," I said. "It's my backyard. You can barely see it from the street. I'm just trying to save energy and money." "Rules are rules, Mr. Lawson. They maintain our property values and community standards." She gestured toward the neighboring houses. "Nobody wants to look at other people's underwear flapping in the breeze. I'm not hanging underwear, and nobody can see it unless they're actively looking into my yard," I argued. Margaret's smile tightened. "The bylaws don't make exceptions for underwear versus other garments, or for visibility from certain angles. All residents agreed to these rules when purchasing property here." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the violation notice. I had indeed signed those HOA agreements when I bought the house, barely skimming the 30-page document. Now I pulled out the full bylaws from my filing cabinet and started reading properly. $300 wasn't going to break me, but it was the principle. I worked in commercial real estate development, and while I respected reasonable regulations, this felt like overreach. I kept thinking about my grandmother, who'd raised 3 kids on a teacher's salary, hanging laundry as a matter of necessity. There was something deeply wrong about punishing someone for such a simple, environmentally friendly act. That night, I sent an email requesting to speak at the next HOA meeting. I also submitted a formal request for a rule amendment. Then I bought a new dryer. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige room with uncomfortable folding chairs arranged in neat rows. About 20 neighbors attended, most looking as though they'd rather be anywhere else. I recognized a few faces: the retired couple who walked their corgi every morning, the nurse who worked night shifts, the young family with twins who'd moved in last spring. When my turn came to speak, I laid out my case: the environmental benefits of air drying, the energy savings, the minimal visual impact in a private backyard. I proposed amending the rules to allow clotheslines in backyards as long as they weren't visible from the street. "Thank you for your input." "Mr. Lawson," Margaret said when I finished, "the board will take your proposal under consideration." But I could tell from her tone that my request was already dead in the water. The other board members, Margaret's friends, who'd been elected year after year with minimal participation from residents, nodded in agreement with her dismissal. 2 weeks later, I received another letter. After careful review, the Architectural Review Committee has denied your request for a rule amendment regarding outdoor laundry displays. That might have been the end of it. I'd tried the proper channels and failed. Most people would accept defeat, pay the fine, and move on. I'm not most people. I paid the fine, but didn't give up. Instead, I went into research mode. First, I checked state laws and discovered that Virginia had passed a right-to-dry provision that protected homeowners' rights to use solar energy, including clotheslines. However, the law included a grandfather clause for existing HOA restrictions. Next, I investigated Oak Ridge Estates HOA in detail. The organization had been run by essentially the same group for 15 years. Margaret Wilson had been president for the past 10, and her influence was everywhere. After talking with a few neighbors, I learned that most residents simply avoided crossing her. "She's got nothing better to do than enforce those rules," said my neighbor Jim, who'd been fined for leaving his trash cans out 12 hours too long. Not worth the headache to fight her. I discovered that HOA elections had pathetically low turnout. Less than 20% of homeowners typically voted. The same board members kept getting re-elected simply because nobody else ran against them. The annual budget showed that a significant portion of HOA fees went to administrative costs and professional services, which seemed unusually high for our modest community. Looking closer, I found that the HOA's legal counsel was Margaret's brother-in-law's firm, and the landscaping company was owned by another board member's son. But the most interesting discovery came when I was reviewing property records at the county office. I noticed that Margaret's house, a colonial at the entrance to our neighborhood, had been listed for sale 6 months ago, then taken off the market. Curious, I called a realtor friend who confirmed that Margaret and her husband were looking to downsize. Their children were grown, and they wanted something smaller, preferably in a nearby active adult community. Their house hadn't sold because they were asking well above market value. Real estate in our area was hot, but even in a seller's market, their asking price was unreasonable. I sat in my car outside the county clerk's office thinking. I'd been planning to diversify my investments anyway. Commercial real estate had been good to me, but I'd been considering branching out. That evening, I called Margaret Wilson. "Mrs. Wilson," I said when she answered, "this is Richard Lawson from down the street. I understand your house is for sale." There was a pause. "We've taken it off the market temporarily," she replied cautiously. "I'd like to make you an offer," I said. "Without the realtor fees, direct purchase." Another pause. Longer this time. "Why would you want to buy our house?" "Investment purposes," I said smoothly. "I'm looking to expand my portfolio in this neighborhood. Your location at the entrance to the community is prime real estate." We arranged to meet the following day. I arrived with a cashier's check for the earnest money and a pre-approval letter from my bank. Margaret and her husband Harold showed me around their immaculate house. 200 square feet, 4 bedrooms, formal dining room, and a sunroom addition they'd built 5 years ago. I offered their full asking price, with one condition: a quick closing. They accepted immediately. I could see the relief in Harold's eyes. They had already put a deposit on a condo in a nearby retirement community. The closing went smoothly. I now owned the HOA president's house, and they had moved into their new condo. But I had no intention of living there. I had something else in mind entirely. After closing on Margaret's house, I submitted plans to the HOA's Architectural Review Committee for what I described as minor interior renovations. The plans I submitted showed simple updates to the kitchen and bathrooms. What I didn't mention was my true intention for the property. I contacted the county zoning office to verify that the property could be used for a small, home-based business. Oak Ridge Estates was zoned for residential use, but county regulations permitted certain home occupations with proper permits. I filed the necessary paperwork. Meanwhile, I continued attending HOA meetings, now as the owner of 2 properties in the neighborhood. Margaret remained HOA president despite her move, as the bylaws only required board members to own property in the community. not necessarily live there. At the next meeting, I raised my hand during the open forum. I'd like to inform the board that I'll be starting a home-based business at my new property, I announced. It's fully compliant with county regulations and zoning laws. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What kind of business? A laundry service, I replied pleasantly. Specialized cleaning for delicate items. You'll need board approval for any business signs or external modifications, she said quickly. Of course, I agreed. I'm well aware of the bylaws. Over the next month, contractors came and went from the house. Inside, walls came down to create a more open space. New plumbing was installed, along with reinforced flooring. I had commercial-grade washers and dryers delivered, energy-efficient models that use significantly less water and electricity than standard machines. The exterior remained unchanged, except for fresh paint in the exact same color as before. I was meticulously careful not to violate any HOA rules. No signs were posted, no external modifications were made. The landscaping remained pristine, with flowering shrubs and neatly trimmed hedges. When everything was ready, I launched Oak Ridge Eco Laundry with a simple website and targeted ads in nearby communities. The business model was straightforward. We offered environmentally friendly laundry services using energy-efficient machines and natural detergents. For a premium, we also provided air-dried options, taking advantage of the spacious backyard that was completely hidden from street view by tall privacy hedges. The first customers were curious neighbors who'd heard about the new business through the grapevine. Then came environmentally conscious clients from surrounding areas, drawn by our eco-friendly approach. Business grew steadily. I hired 2 part-time employees, a retired teacher and a college student, to help manage the operation. We were careful to maintain residential parking standards with a strict appointment-only policy that prevented any traffic or parking issues. It took 3 weeks for Margaret to show up at the door. "This is completely unacceptable," she declared, her voice tight with anger. "You've turned a residential property into a commercial laundromat. This violates the spirit of our community guidelines." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I've reviewed the HOA bylaws thoroughly. I'm not violating any specific rules. There are no external signs, no visible business activity from the street, no parking issues." I handed her a folder. "Here are copies of all my county permits and business license. Everything is legal and above board. The intent of the rules is to maintain property values and community standards," I finished for her. "My property is impeccably maintained. In fact, I've improved it considerably with the renovations." Margaret's face flushed. "The board will be discussing this." "I look forward to it," I replied. "As a property owner, I'll be attending the meeting." That night, I received emails and texts from neighbors who'd witnessed Margaret's visit. Some were concerned, others amused. A few even expressed support. "About time someone stood up to her," wrote Jim. "Let me know if you need anything." The next HOA meeting was the most well-attended in years. Word had spread about my laundry business, and residents were curious about the confrontation. Margaret called the meeting to order with a grim expression. "We have a serious situation in our community," she began. "Mr. Lawson has essentially opened a commercial laundromat in a residential property." "Point of order," I interrupted, standing up. "My business is properly classified as a home-based laundry service, not a laundromat. I have all the necessary permits." Margaret continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The board is proposing an emergency amendment to the bylaws to prohibit laundry businesses specifically. This was what I had been waiting for." I raised my hand again. "I believe such an amendment would require a 2/3 vote of all property owners, not just the board. And it couldn't be applied retroactively to an already established business with proper permits." The HOA's lawyer, Margaret's brother-in-law, cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson is technically correct about the voting requirement." I smiled. Additionally, I'd like to point out that targeting one specific type of business could be seen as discriminatory, especially when that business promotes environmental conservation, a value increasingly important to home buyers. Such actions might actually harm property values. The meeting devolved into a heated discussion. Some residents supported Margaret, concerned about setting a precedent for businesses in the neighborhood. Others were more pragmatic, pointing out that my business hadn't caused any actual problems. A vote was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, I continued operating my laundry service while carefully cultivating relationships with neighbors. I offered free services to several residents, sponsored the neighborhood summer picnic, and made improvements to the property that enhanced the entire street's appearance. By the time the vote came around, I had enough support to block the amendment. Margaret was furious but powerless. The standoff between Oak Ridge Eco Laundry and the HOA continued for months. Margaret filed complaints with various county departments, but my operation was fully compliant with all regulations. She tried to rally the neighborhood against me, but many residents had become loyal customers or were simply tired of the HOA's heavy-handed approach. Meanwhile, I was building a coalition for change within the community. I started attending every HOA meeting, asking pointed questions about the budget and decision-making processes. I requested detailed financial records and distributed summaries to interested neighbors. I highlighted the connections between board members and service providers hired by the HOA. Did you know we're paying 30% above market rate for landscaping? I asked at one meeting. And that the company is owned by board member Taylor's son. People started paying attention. Attendance at meetings grew. More residents began questioning the status quo. 6 months after opening my laundry business, I announced my candidacy for the HOA board, along with a slate of like-minded neighbors. We ran on a platform of transparency, fiscal responsibility, and reasonable rule enforcement. Margaret and her allies fought back hard, sending alarming emails about property values and community standards. But when election day came, turnout was triple the usual rate. My slate won in a landslide. At our first board meeting, we voted to make several changes. We established a competitive bidding process for all service contracts. We created a more transparent violation review process. And we amended the laundry rule to allow clotheslines in backyards, provided they weren't visible from the street. Margaret attended that meeting, sitting stiffly in the back row. When the clothesline amendment passed, she stood up to leave. "Mrs. Wilson," I called, "we value your many years of service to this community. Your experience would be welcome on one of our new advisory committees." She paused, surprised by the olive branch. "I'll consider it," she said finally. After the meeting, I drove to my original house, the one where this had all started. I went into the backyard and installed a new clothesline, this time a sturdier, permanent model. The next morning I hung out sheets and towels, watching them wave gently in the breeze. Later that day, as I was folding the dried laundry on my back porch, I noticed Margaret walking slowly past my house. She stopped at the edge of my property, looking toward the backyard. After a moment's hesitation, she came up the driveway. "Your laundry service has been good for my arthritis," she admitted grudgingly. "Harold says he hasn't seen me this mobile in years." I nodded, continuing to fold a sheet. "My mother used to hang laundry," she said unexpectedly. "I'd help her when I was a girl." There was something peaceful about it. "There still is," I replied. She looked at the neatly folded pile. "That fresh air smell is impossible to replicate." "Would you like some tea?" I asked, gesturing to the porch chairs. Margaret hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "That would be nice." As we sat there, drinking tea and watching butterflies visit the flowering bushes along my fence, I realized something important. This had never really been about clotheslines or rules or even principle. It had been about community, about finding the balance between individual freedom and collective standards, about remembering that behind every regulation was a human being with their own story. My laundry business continued to thrive, eventually expanding to a properly zoned commercial location while maintaining the original house as a drop-off point. The HOA flourished under new leadership, becoming more responsive and transparent. Property values in Oak Ridge Estates rose steadily, partly due to our reputation as an environmentally progressive community, and every summer, more and more clotheslines appeared in the backyards of Oak Ridge Estates, hidden from the street but open to the sun and wind, just as they had been in our grandparents' time. Sometimes the simplest acts of resistance lead to the most profound changes, and sometimes clean laundry is about more than just removing stains. It's about clearing away the barriers between neighbors and hanging out a new vision for community, one that respects both rules and reasons, property values and personal values. In the end, we all just want our small corner of the world to be clean, peaceful and free. Sometimes you have to hang that truth out where everyone can see it.